Now you match the floor. Did she just throw that on him? Don't look so surprised. You're staff. This is what staffed is for.
She's unbelievable.
On your knees. You missed a spot. Clean it before you embarrass the people who actually matter.
Are you getting this?
Go ahead. Film it. Maybe then he'll remember his place. He hasn't said a single word.
The wine hit him across the chest in a single dark arc, soaking through the gray fabric of his maintenance shirt before the glass even finished its swing. The room went quiet the way a room does when something cruel is about to be enjoyed. Vanessa held the empty stem between two fingers, her diamond catching the chandelier light, and she smiled the way a person smiles when they are certain the floor will never tilt under them. On your knees, she said. You missed a spot. Clean it before you embarrass the people who actually matter. Somewhere near the bar, a phone rose, then another. 40 guests in tuxedos and silk waited to watch a man in a janitor's uniform be made small. Daniel did not argue. He did not wipe the wine from his shirt. He set the rag he'd been holding down on the marble, slowly, deliberately, and for one long second he simply looked at her, calm, unhurried. The way you look at weather you already know is passing. Then he knelt. He cleaned. He let the whole room see exactly who had lost something in that moment, and it was not him. Not one person there knew that the contract their entire fortune was waiting on required a single signature, and that the man on his knees was the only hand that could give it. Comment below where you're watching from, and stay until the end. 3 weeks earlier, the lobby of Hale Tower smelled of cold and fresh lilies, and Daniel Hale was on a ladder changing a light fixture that did not need changing. It was the kind of detail nobody noticed, which was exactly why he'd chosen it. The fixture had been flickering. A loose connection. 10 minutes of work, but he'd stretched it into 40, because 40 minutes on a ladder above the lobby gave a man a perfect view of how people behaved when they believed no one important was watching. He wore the uniform of Maddox Building Services, gray with a navy collar, his name stitched in white thread above the pocket. The thread said Danny. His real badge hung from a lanyard around his neck, tucked inside his shirt where no one could read it. To anyone glancing up, it was the cheap plastic ID of a contract worker. It was not. It was a black card with no name printed on it at all, and a magnetic strip that opened every door in the building, including 3 that the chief executive of Hale Industries did not know existed. Below him, the morning moved, bankers in good shoes, assistants carrying coffee they had not been thanked for, the security guard, Ray, nodding to each of them with a patience Daniel had come to admire. And then the revolving door turned, and a woman came through it the way some people enter a room, as though the room had been waiting for her. She was beautiful in the engineered way of people who have never once been allowed to be ordinary. Dark hair pulled back hard. A coat that cost more than Ray earned in a season. She walked to the front desk, and the young woman behind it, Priya, new, 2 months in, straightened and smiled. Good morning. How can I help you? I have a meeting on 41. Whitmore. Tell them I'm here. Of course, may I get your? You may get my coffee, the woman said, not looking up from her phone. Oat milk. And if it's the burnt kind from the machine, don't bother bringing it back. Priya's smile held the way a smile holds when you need a job. Right away. The woman, Daniel would learn her name within the hour, would learn far more than her name within the month, did not say thank you. She did not say it when Priya returned with the coffee, half running, and she did not say it when the coffee was, in fact, wrong. And she set it down on the marble counter hard enough to slosh and walked to the elevators without a backward glance. Up on his ladder, Daniel watched the small drama the way you watch a thing you have seen before, in 100 different costumes. He had built a company of 11,000 people. He had learned to read them in the half-seconds when they thought it didn't count. This is the part worth understanding, the part he would have explained to no one. Daniel Hale was not a saint, and he knew it. The whole reason he was on this ladder, in this uniform, with a false name stitched over his heart, was a kind of arrogance dressed up as humility. He was testing people who had not agreed to be tested. He was setting traps no one could see, and then judging the ones who stepped in. He had told himself it was wisdom. Some mornings on the ladder, he suspected it was something closer to cowardice, a man too afraid of being loved for his money to simply risk being loved at all. He had reasons. That did not make them good reasons. 8 years ago, he had married a woman named Eleanor who had laughed at his jokes and read the books he loved and cried at the right moments in films, and who had, it turned out, been recording the value of his holdings in a spreadsheet the entire time. He had found it by accident, a laptop left open on the kitchen island. One Sunday morning, a tab was a recipe, a column of figures with his name at the top, and dates running back to 6 weeks before they had met. She had known his net worth before she had known his middle name. She had built the affection backward from the number, like an architect designing a house to fit a chandelier she had already bought. He remembered standing in that kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, looking at the screen. And the strangest part had not been the betrayal. The strangest part had been how good the performance had been. She had cried at the right moments in films. Nobody had told her to do that. She had simply understood that a man who builds things alone is starving for someone who seems to feel what he feels. And she had fed him exactly that, for 3 years, with a spreadsheet open in the next tab. The divorce had been clean and quiet, and had cost him a number with too many zeros. What it had actually cost him was the ability to believe a kind word. After Eleanor, every smile aimed at him became a question he could not stop asking. Would you still be smiling if I had nothing? And there was no way to answer the question without becoming nothing, at least temporarily, at least in costume, and so the costume was born, not as a clever idea, but as the only way he could think of to ask the one question that mattered without giving the other person a chance to lie about the answer. So now he did this. He put on the gray uniform 2 or 3 days a week, and he became Danny, the contract maintenance man, and he watched how the world treated a man it believed had nothing. It was the only experiment he trusted anymore. He was aware dimly that it had curdled something in him. He had not yet decided to stop. He climbed down from the ladder. He folded the cloth into his back pocket, and before he went to find the woman who had not said thank you, he stopped, as he did most mornings, at the security desk. Ray Coleman had guarded the lobby of Hale Tower for 19 years, which meant he had guarded it longer than the man who owned it had owned it. He was 63, broad in the shoulders going soft, and he had a way of greeting every single person who came through the revolving door. The bankers, the assistants, the couriers, the woman who would not say thank you, with the same unhurried nod, as though each of them were equally worth the trouble of acknowledging. Daniel had watched him do it for weeks before he understood that it was not a habit. It was a discipline. Ray had decided, at some point in his long, quiet life, that he would treat the world as though everyone in it mattered, and he had never once made an exception, not even for the people who made it easy to. "Danny," Ray said, sliding a paper cup across the desk, "got you the good coffee, not the machine stuff. You don't have to do that." "I know I don't." Ray sipped his own. "How's the light up there?" "Loose connection." "It'll hold now. Everything holds if you take your time with it." Ray nodded toward the elevators, where the dark-haired woman had just vanished behind sliding doors. "You see that?" "I saw it. Priya's been here 2 months. Cries in the supply room about twice a week. Thinks nobody knows." Ray said it without judgment, the way you report weather. People come through that door, and they decide in about half a second whether you're a person or a piece of the furniture. You can tell who they are by which one they pick. He looked at Daniel, at Danny, the maintenance contractor, the man in gray. And there was something in the look that Daniel could not quite read, something that, much later, he would wonder about. "You pick person, first day you walked in here." "I noticed not everybody does." Daniel held the paper cup and felt absurdly found out. Ray had no idea who he was. Ray had decided to be kind to a maintenance contractor who could do nothing for him, and the kindness was real precisely because there was no calculation behind it, and the irony of it, that the man performing a disguise to find honesty, had been gently, unknowingly seen through by a security guard with a coffee budget of nothing, was not lost on him. "Thanks, Ray." "Take your time with the light," Ray said, and then he turned to nod at the courier coming through the door. The same unhurried nod, person and not furniture, 19 years of it, and Daniel walked to the elevators carrying a cup of coffee he had not paid for and a feeling he had not expected. The name Whitmore had stopped him cold, but Ray had warmed something the wine, 3 weeks later, would not be able to put out. The Whitmore deal was the largest thing on his desk that quarter. Whitmore Holdings was an old family company, real estate and shipping, the kind of firm that had been impressive in 1985 and had spent the years since quietly bleeding. On paper, it looked like a marriage of equals. Hale Industries would absorb Whitmore's logistics arm, fold it into the Hale network, and in exchange the Whitmore family would receive a sum that would let them retire from relevance with their dignity intact. The press release would call it a partnership. Everyone who could read a balance sheet knew it was a rescue. What no one on the Whitmore side knew was that the man whose signature finalized the deal had never once attended a meeting in person. Mr. Hale to the Whitmores was a voice on a conference line, a name on a letterhead, a figure they had constructed in their imaginations out of rumor and hope. They had been told he was reclusive. They had been told he was eccentric. They had been told, by the intermediary who arranged such things, that Mr. Hale liked to see the people he did business with as they really were before he committed. They had not been told that he meant it literally. Daniel found Vanessa Whitmore in the 41st floor conference room, the glass one with the view, where his own director of operations was walking her family through the final terms. He came in through the service door with a cart of cleaning supplies and a request from facilities to check the climate control. It's been running warm. No one questioned a man in gray. No one ever did. That was the entire point. There were 3 Whitmores. Gerald, the father, silver-haired, expensively tired, a man who smiled with his mouth and watched with his eyes. A son, Tripp, who looked like he had never once been told no and had not enjoyed the rumor of it. And Vanessa, who sat with her back very straight and ran the meeting more than her father did, correcting the lawyer twice, catching a number the lawyer had rounded. Sharp in a way Daniel could not help but respect, even as he disliked her. "The Hale signature," Gerald was saying. "When do we actually get it?" "Mr. Hale signs personally," Daniel's director said. "He always has. He'll be present for the closing." "He'd better be," Tripp muttered. "We've been chasing a ghost for 4 months." Vanessa said nothing, but Daniel watched her hand tighten on her pen, watched a muscle move in her jaw, and understood in that moment something the family had not said out loud and perhaps had not said to each other. They were not negotiating from strength. They were drowning, and this deal was the rope. He knelt by the thermostat, pretending to read it. Behind him, Gerald lowered his voice, the way people do when they forget that the help has ears. "It has to close," he said. "You understand that, Vanessa? After the Hartfield thing, the banks won't." "I understand it, Dad. Cold. Final. I understand it better than you do." Daniel adjusted a dial that did not need adjusting and let himself feel, for one unwelcome moment, something he had not planned to feel. Not pity, exactly. Recognition. He knew the sound of a person holding a family together with their bare hands while everyone around them assumed the holding was free. It did not excuse what she had done to Priya. It did not excuse what she would do to him in 3 weeks. But it was real, and he had built a life on noticing what was real, and so he noticed. He wheeled his cart out. Vanessa did not look at him. To her, he had not been in the room at all. But he learned something else about her that week, by accident. The way he learned most of what was true. It was late on a Thursday, after the offices had emptied, and he was on 41 replacing a ballast in the ceiling lights of the small conference room when he heard a voice through the wall. The glass conference room next door. The one with the view. He almost ignored it. Then he recognized it as Vanessa's, and he stayed still on his ladder, in the dark, and listened, and was not proud of listening. She was on the phone. She thought she was alone. "I've gone through it 4 times, Dad." 4. There's no version where we make the bond payment without the Hale money. The Hartfield write-down took the cushion. You know that, you signed off on it. A pause. Her voice, which Daniel had only ever heard as a blade, was doing something he had not heard it do. It was tired. No, I'm not panicking. One of us has to not panic, and it's apparently going to be me, like it's always going to be me. Another pause longer. I know he built it. I know it was Grandpa's. I know what the name means. Why do you think I'm doing this? Why do you think I said yes to Preston, She stopped herself. It doesn't matter what I feel about Preston. It matters that his family's money, plus the Hale deal, keeps 300 people employed and keeps your name on a building. So yes, I'll smile. I'll be the perfect heiress. I'll get it closed. Just let me handle it, please. Just for once, let me handle it without you handling me. She hung up, and in the dark on his ladder, Daniel heard a sound he had not expected. The small, hard, swallowed sound of a person who has trained herself never to cry, crying for exactly 4 sous, and then making herself stop. He stayed very still until she gathered her things and left. He did not finish the ballast that night. It changed nothing about what she would do to Clara. It changed nothing about who she was when she believed no one was watching the people beneath her. But it complicated her, and Daniel had built a life on refusing to let people stay simple, and so the woman who would soon throw wine on him became, in the dark of a Thursday, something worse than a villain. She became a person he understood. A person carrying a sinking house on her back, who had decided that the people inside the house were worth saving, and the people outside it were not worth seeing, and who had never once questioned where she had drawn that line, because no one in her life had survived long enough beneath her to make her look. Clara Bennett noticed everything, because noticing was how she had survived. She worked the catering shifts that Hale Towers Event Company staffed for the corporate functions on the upper floors, the launch parties, the investor dinners, the engagement gala that was 3 weeks out, and already the only thing anyone on 41 could talk about. She was 34 and looked older around the eyes, and younger when she laughed, which was not often during a shift. She had a daughter named Maya, who was 6, who liked dinosaurs and asked questions no adult could answer, and who was the reason Clara worked 2 jobs and slept 5 hours and never, ever called in sick. Daniel met her the way you meet someone you will later be unable to imagine not knowing, by accident, in a service corridor over food. It was nearly 11 at night. There had been a board dinner on 41, and Daniel had stayed late under the cover of deep cleaning the executive kitchen, which mostly meant standing in a quiet kitchen alone, which he sometimes needed. Clara came in pushing a cart of leftovers headed for the trash. Whole trays of food, salmon, and roasted vegetables, and a dessert that had cost the catering company $40 a plate, all of it untouched, all of it bound for the dumpster, because policy said leftovers could not be donated, could not be taken home, could only be thrown away. She stopped when she saw him. He was a stranger. It was late. But she looked at his gray uniform and his tired face, and something in her relaxed, because she knew that uniform from the inside, knew what it meant to be the last person in a building full of food they were not allowed to eat. "You eat?" she asked. He blinked. "Sorry? Tonight. You eat anything?" She was already pulling a clean plate from the rack. "Because this is all going in the trash in about 4 minutes. And I cannot watch one more tray of $40 salmon hit a dumpster, while a person standing right here is hungry. It's against my religion. You have a religion against wasted salmon." "I have a daughter who's gone to bed hungry," Clara said. Plain, not for sympathy, just true, so yeah. "I have a religion against wasted food. Sit, eat. I'll say you were inspecting it for quality." He sat. He ate. And while he ate, she did not interview him, did not perform, did not try to be anything. She wrapped a second plate in foil and pressed it on him for tomorrow. And she told him a story about Maya naming a houseplant Gerald. He did not yet know to flinch at the name, and she laughed at her own story, tired and real, and Daniel Hale, who had built every defense a wealthy man can build against being deceived, found himself entirely undefended against a woman giving away food that was about to be thrown away. She did not know who he was. That was the whole thing. There was no spreadsheet behind her kindness. There was no version of this where it paid off, because as far as she knew, he was a maintenance contractor who would never be able to do a single thing for her. He went home that night to a penthouse she could not have imagined, and he could not stop thinking about the foil-wrapped plate sitting in the refrigerator of his fake life. And he understood, with the particular clarity of a man who has been wrong about everything important, that he had been looking for the wrong thing in all the wrong people. He had been testing for honesty as though it were a quality you could trap. Clara had not passed a test. She had simply never been taking one. The engagement gala was Vanessa's idea, and it was a weapon. The Whitmore deal was nearly closed. The closing would happen at Hale Tower in a week. The signature finally given, the family finally saved. And Vanessa, who had 3 months earlier accepted a separate proposal of marriage from a man named Preston Vale, a hedge fund heir whose family money would, combined with the Hale rescue, return the Whitmores not just to safety but to dominance, had decided to celebrate her engagement in the Hale Tower penthouse, the very building whose money was saving her family, the night before the closing. It was, Daniel had to admit, an audacious piece of theater. 2 fortunes joined in one room. The Whitmore name resurrected on a stage owned by the very company resurrecting it. She had even arranged for the catering through Hale's own event division, which was how Clara came to be working the floor that night, and how Daniel came to be there, in his gray uniform, on a maintenance call he had invented for himself, because some part of him needed to see how this woman behaved at the summit of her own victory. He should not have gone. He knew that even as he went. There was no operational reason. The building did not need him. He went because the experiment had its hooks in him still, and because, though he would not have said this aloud, he wanted to stand in the room as no one and watch the woman who treated no ones as furniture. And he realized, too late, for Clara to see that he had come. The penthouse glittered. 200 people, the kind of crowd where the watches told you more than the faces. Preston Vale, the fiancé, pink-cheeked and pleased, working the room. Gerald in the corner, drinking more than a man drinks at his daughter's celebration. Tripp, loud. And Vanessa at the center of it all in a column of pale silk, luminous, untouchable, the architect of her own salvation, accepting congratulations like a queen accepts tribute. Clara worked the floor with a tray, invisible, efficient, the way you are trained to be, invisible. Daniel stayed near the service margins, fixing a flickering sconce that he had, in fact, loosened himself an hour earlier. He watched, and he saw the moment it began. But before the wine, there was the toast, and the toast told him everything. Gerald Whitmore stood with a glass, and the room hushed, and he spoke about his daughter, about her strength, her grace, her brilliance, the way she had stepped up in difficult times. He did not say what the difficult times were. The room did not know the family was 3 weeks from ruin. The room thought it was watching a dynasty, marry a dynasty. And Daniel watched Vanessa stand beside her father and accept the praise with a smile so perfect it could have been welded on. And he watched her face flick once, just once, to the back of the room where a man from the bank stood holding a folder, and he understood that even here, even now, at the center of her own triumph, she was working. The smile was a job. The engagement was a job. The whole shimmering night was a frantic, beautiful, exhausting job to keep 300 people employed and a name on a building, and she was the only one in her family doing it, and no one in the room would ever know. He almost felt for her. He almost crossed the floor right then, not to confront her, but to, he didn't know what, to tell her he'd heard her on the phone, to tell her there were easier ways to be saved than this. And then a guest, drunk, careless, backed into Clara, and her tray tipped, and a single champagne flute slid off and shattered at the edge of the dance floor. It was nothing. A waiter swept it in 30 seconds. But Vanessa had seen it, and Vanessa, on the night of her triumph, had been waiting all evening for something to be perfect about, and a shattered glass on her engagement floor was not perfect. "You," she said to Clara, across the room, in a voice pitched to Carrie, "are you actually incapable of holding a tray?" The room's volume dropped a notch. People half-turned. Clara lowered her eyes. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll clean it right. You'll do it on your hands and knees, and you'll do it now. And then you'll get your things and get out because I am not paying for clumsy. And here is where Daniel, watching, made his choice. He could have stayed at the margins. He could have let it pass, the way he had let 100 cruelties pass in his weeks of watching, gathering data, judging from a safe distance. That was the experiment. Observe, do not interfere. He set down his screwdriver. He crossed the floor, and he said, to Vanessa Whitmore, in front of 200 people, it was an accident. The guest stepped into her. I saw it. The room turned fully now. A maintenance man in gray wine, stain of attention spreading across him, contradicting the woman of the hour. Vanessa looked at him the way you look at a stain you have just noticed on something you own. Did I ask you? No. Then why, she said, walking toward him, slow, every eye in the room now hers, are you speaking? Because she's right and you're wrong, Daniel said, evenly, and someone in this room should be willing to say so. It was, in retrospect, a mistake. Not a moral mistake. He did not regret defending Clara, but a tactical one because it took the target off her and put it on him, and Vanessa Whitmore, drowning in a way no one could see, needed a target the way a drowning person needs air. She picked up a glass of red wine from a passing tray. She looked at his name patch, Danny. She smiled. And the wine hit him across the chest in a single dark arc. On your knees, she said. You missed a spot. Clean it before you embarrass the people who actually matter. The phones rose. The room waited. And Daniel Hale, soaked in wine, in a gray uniform, with 11,000 employees, and a market valuation he had stopped tracking years ago, and a black key card hidden against his chest that could open every door in the building they were standing in. Daniel Hale knelt. He knelt slowly. He picked up a napkin from the floor where it had fallen. He cleaned the wine. He let her have it, all of it, every second of it, because he had learned long ago that the most frightening thing you can do to a person who is performing power is to refuse to perform fear back at them. He did not look angry. He did not look ashamed. He looked the way a man looks when he is doing a chore, and that, the ordinariness of it, the total absence of the humiliation she had ordered, began, slowly, to turn the room against her instead of him. People shifted. Someone lowered a phone. Preston Vale, the fiancé, said quietly, Vanessa, maybe, and was silenced by a look. And then a single person crossed the open floor. Clara. She walked through the cleared space with 200 people watching, and she crouched down beside the man in gray, and she handed him a fresh napkin from her apron, and she said, Lo, just, for him, you didn't have to do that. Neither did you, he said. Vanessa's voice cracked across the room like a whip. Get away from him. Both of you are done. Out. Tonight. Clara stood. Her hands were shaking. Daniel could see them, the way the napkin trembled, and he understood what that costume of calm was hiding. She had a daughter. She had 2 jobs and 5 hours of sleep, and a religion against wasted food, and she had just thrown one of those jobs into a fire to crouch beside a stranger, and she had done it anyway. Okay, Clara said quietly. Okay. She gathered her things. Daniel rose from the floor. And Gerald Whitmore, watching from the corner with a drink in his hand and a closing in the morning, leaned toward his daughter and said the thing that Daniel, passing close, heard clearly. Was that necessary? On tonight of all nights? If the Hale thing goes sideways, Vanessa, if that signature isn't on the table tomorrow, we are finished. Do you understand me? Finished. So can you please, for one night, stop making enemies? It's a janitor, Dad, Vanessa said. What's a janitor going to do? It was the kind of question that gets answered. Daniel did not retaliate that night. This is the part the room never saw, the part that mattered most. He went down to the service level. He took off the wine-soaked shirt and stood for a long moment in the empty corridor. And he did not feel triumphant, and he did not feel wounded. He felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Then he made a phone call. He called Marcus Devlin, who had been the chairman of Hale Industries for 9 years, and was the only person alive who knew that the maintenance contractor named Danny and the founder named Hale were the same man. Marcus answered on the second ring because Marcus always answered. It's me, Daniel said. The Whitmore closing. Tomorrow. I'll be there in person. A pause. You never go in person. I'm going to this one, Daniel. Marcus had known him too long to pretend not to understand. What happened? So Daniel told him, not the wine. He barely mentioned the wine. He told him about Priya and the coffee. He told him about the way Vanessa ran her family's salvation with a competence he respected and a cruelty he could not. He told him about Clara, the salmon, the napkin, the way she had crouched down on a floor in front of 200 people who could end her with a word, and how she had not known and would never have guessed that the man she was kneeling beside could buy and sell the whole room. So this is about the caterer, Marcus said carefully. No, Daniel said. And then, because Marcus deserved honesty, maybe partly, but no, it's about the deal. Here is the thing about the Whitmore deal that Vanessa Whitmore did not understand. Because she had been raised to read the strength of a hand by the cut of its sleeve. The merger was structured around what the lawyers called a founder's discretionary signature. In most acquisitions, once the board approves and the lawyers sign, the deal is done. The chief executive's signature is a formality. But Hale Industries was Daniel's company in a way that few large companies belong to anyone, and he had built into every major transaction a clause that gave him, personally, the right to refuse a closing up until the final moment, for any reason or no reason, with no penalty to Hale, and full forfeiture of the deal. His lawyers had argued against it for years. It made deals nervous. It made counterparties insist on guarantees. But Daniel had kept it, in every contract, for a reason he had never fully explained to anyone, and the reason was this. He had learned, the hard way with Eleanor, that the most important information about a person often arrives at the very last second, when they think they have already won. He wanted, always, to be able to walk away from a thing the moment he saw what it really was. The Whitmore closing was scheduled for 9 the next morning. The contract was complete. The board had approved it. Every signature was in place but one, his. And the family that needed that signature to keep their name, their house, their place in the world, had spent the previous evening teaching him, in detail, exactly who they were when they believed no one who mattered was watching. Daniel did not decide anything that night. He wanted to be clear with himself about that later. He did not lie in the dark plotting a downfall. He simply called Marcus, told him to be at the closing, and went to sleep beside a foil-wrapped plate in a refrigerator. In the small apartment he kept for his life, as Danny, because he had not been able to bring himself to drive back to the penthouse where this whole experiment had started. Except he did not sleep. He sat at the small kitchen table in the small apartment, a real apartment, rented under the name Danny Hale, with thin walls and a radiator that knocked and a window that looked out on a brick air shaft, and he turned the problem over until the streetlight outside went from orange to gray. The thing he kept circling was Vanessa's coming accusation, the one she had not yet made but that he could already hear, because he had been making it to himself for an hour. He had watched. He had stood at the margins with a screwdriver and let a woman humiliate a caterer because the humiliation was useful to him, was data, was the experiment running its course. He had crossed the floor only when it reached Clara. And the truth he could not get around, alone at the table with the radiator knocking, was that a better man would have crossed it for Priya 3 weeks ago. The first morning, over a cup of coffee and a word not said. He had let cruelty run because watching it run confirmed what he already believed about people. He had wanted to be right more than he had wanted to be kind. That was the rot at the center of the whole clever scheme. And he had not seen it until a woman in silk was about to name it in front of 200 people. So the question was not really whether to refuse the deal. He had known, somewhere under the noise, since the moment the wine hit his chest, that he would refuse it. The question was whether refusing it was justice or was just a richer man's revenge wearing justice as a costume. One more costume, the last one, the one he could not take off because it was made of his own face. He did not resolve it that night. He is not sure, even now, that he ever fully resolved it. But somewhere near gray light, he understood at least this much. That the deal had to die not because of what was done to Danny, but because of what the Whitmores had revealed about what they would do to everyone who could not throw wine back. The receptionist, the caterer, the 300 employees whose jobs were, to Vanessa, a number she would protect and a set of faces she would never learn. He would not hand the people of his own company down into that. That part, at least, was clean. The rest of it he would have to carry. In the morning, before the suit, there was one more thing. He had taken to stopping at a coffee cart 2 blocks from the tower, a metal cart run by a man named Hossein, who made the only coffee in the district worth the walk. And that morning, in the gray uniform one last time, though he did not yet know, it was the last time, he found Clara already there, in line, in her street clothes, off shift, a paper cup in her hand, and her phone pressed to her ear, and her face doing something that made him stop on the sidewalk. "I know, baby. I know. Mommy's coming. Tell Mrs. Okafor I'll be there in 20 minutes. She listened. Her shoulders dropped. "No, I'm not in trouble. Why would I be in trouble? There was a thing at work last night. It's fine. Everything's fine. Quetzalcoatlus, I promise, the second I'm home." She hung up and pressed the heel of her hand against one eye and stood there in the morning, not knowing he was watching. "You got fired," Daniel said, coming up beside her, as Danny, in the gray, the last lie he would tell her. She turned and saw him, and to his surprise something in her face eased. "Hey, you, the floor guy." A short laugh. "Yeah, I don't know." She said I was done. "But the catering manager called me at 7 this morning and said never mind, ignore it. I've got every shift I want and $1 more an hour." Which makes no sense, because that woman was very clear that I was finished. She shook her head. "I should be relieved. I am relieved, but I keep waiting for the catch. Things don't just go right. Not for me. There's always a catch." Daniel, who was the catch, who had made the call to the catering manager at 6:40 that morning, looked at her and felt the full weight of the disguise for the first time as a thing pressing down rather than a thing protecting him. "Maybe somebody just decided you should keep your job," he said. "Nobody just decides that." But she said it gently, and she bought him a coffee with her $1 more an hour she didn't have yet, and she did not know. And he let her not know for one more morning, because he could not yet find the way to say it that would not break something. "What you did last night," he said, crossing the floor. "That was stupid," Clara said. "It was stupid. I have a kid. I can't afford stupid." She looked into her coffee. "But you were on the floor and nobody was helping you, and I have this thing where I can't watch it. The food in the dumpster, the person on the floor. I can't watch it. It's a flaw, honestly. My mother had it too, and it never once made her life easier." She looked up. "Did you get home okay? After?" "I got home okay. Good." She checked her phone, winced at the time. "I gotta run. The babysitter charges by the panic. See you around, floor guy." And she went, half running, into the morning, off to a 6-year-old and a flying giraffe, having no idea that the floor guy was about to put on a suit and end a dynasty, partly, though not entirely, for her. 2 blocks later, in the rented apartment, Danny Hale took off the gray uniform for what he did not yet know would be the last time, and Daniel Hale put on a suit. The closing was in the largest conference room on 45, the one Daniel's company kept for occasions, the one with the long table, and the city falling away beyond the glass. The Whitmores arrived at 8:45, all 3 of them, and Vanessa came with them, immaculate, last night already filed away as nothing, a janitor and a caterer already forgotten. They were nervous. Daniel could see it from where he stood. Not in the room yet, watching through the glass from the corridor, in his suit. Unrecognized even now because they had never seen his face, and a man becomes invisible in a uniform, but also, strangely, in a crowd of suits that all look the same. Gerald drummed his fingers. Tripp checked his phone. Vanessa sat with her back straight and waited for the ghost named Hale to finally, mercifully, appear and sign and save them. Daniel's lawyers were already seated. The Whitmore lawyers were already seated. The contract lay in the center of the table, in a leather folder, open to the last page, where a single line waited for a single name. At 9 exactly, the door opened, and Marcus Devlin walked in. Marcus was 61, silver, severe, the kind of man whose presence reorganizes a room. The Whitmores rose halfway out of instinct, assuming he was Hale. He was not, and he did not let them think it for long. "Mr. Whitmore," Marcus said, shaking Gerald's hand. "Marcus Devlin, chairman of the board. Thank you for your patience these past months." He nodded to the others. "Mr. Hale will be in shortly. He wanted me to make sure everyone was comfortable." "He's actually coming?" Tripp said. "In person?" "He's already in the building," Marcus said. Daniel watched relief move across all three Whitmore faces. The ghost was real. The signature was coming. The rope was in their hands. He let them have 90 seconds of it. He had learned over the years that the last 90 seconds before a thing collapses are when you see people most clearly. And he found, standing in the corridor, that he no longer wanted to watch. The experiment had stopped being interesting. It had become only sad. He pushed open the door and walked in. No one looked up at first. He was a man in a gray suit. There were several men in gray suits. He walked to the head of the table, to the empty chair that had been left for Mr. Hale, and he stood behind it, and Marcus rose. "Everyone," Marcus said. "May I introduce Daniel Hale, founder and chief executive of Hale Industries." There is a particular silence that happens when two facts that a person believed could not occupy the same space suddenly do. Vanessa Whitmore looked at the man standing at the head of the table, and for one full second her face held nothing at all, because the machinery behind it had stopped. She knew the face. She had seen it the night before, on its knees, wine soaking through gray cotton, a napkin in its hand. The maintenance man. Daniel did not smile. He did not gloat. He pulled out the chair and sat, and he reached into his jacket and took out a black key card on a lanyard and set it on the table where the morning light caught it. The master card, the one that opened every door in the building, the card she had seen around the janitor's neck and dismissed. He set it down not as a threat, but as a fact. Here is the thing you did not see. Here is the door you did not know was a door. "Good morning," he said. "I believe we've met." Gerald Whitmore's face had gone the color of paper. He understood faster than his children did. He had been at the corner of the penthouse. He had heard himself say the words finished and janitor, and what's a janitor going to do? Tripp was still catching up, his mouth slightly open, looking between his sister and the man at the head of the table, as though waiting for someone to explain the joke. Vanessa did not look away. Daniel gave her that she had nerve even now. She held his eyes, and he watched her run the calculation, watched her understand the structure of the trap she was already inside, watched her realize that the contract on the table, the rope, the salvation, depended entirely on a signature from a man she had ordered onto his knees the night before. "Mr. Hale," her lawyer began smoothly, "I'm sure whatever happened last night." "Nothing happened last night," Daniel said. "That has anything to do with this contract. I want to be very clear about that. I'm not refusing this deal because a woman threw wine on a man she thought was a janitor." He let that sit. "I'm refusing it because of what it told me." He opened the leather folder. He looked at the last page, the empty line, the place where his name was meant to go. The merger was sound. The numbers worked. On any other morning, he would have signed it without thinking, and Whitmore Holdings would have been folded into a to Hale, and the family would have kept their name, and he would never have known a single thing about who they were. "This deal," he said, "would have saved your family. You know that. I know that. Your father said it out loud last night, in a corner with a drink in his hand, that if this didn't close, you were finished. I heard him. I was 3 feet away, in a gray uniform, which is apparently the only kind of invisibility money can't see through." Gerald closed his eyes. "I've made a lot of decisions about a lot of companies," Daniel went on, "and most of them are about numbers, and this one looked like it was about numbers too. But it isn't. It's about what happens to a company when its character flows downhill, into the way it treats the people it doesn't need anything from. The receptionist who brought you coffee, the caterer who dropped the glass. You don't think those people matter to a balance sheet. You might be right. But they matter to me, because they're the only honest data I've got about who I'd be in business with." He picked up the pen. The whole room leaned, just slightly, the way a room leans toward a hope. He set the pen down again, Uncapped, unused. I'm not signing this. The word that came out of Gerald Whitmore was not a word. It was the sound a man makes when the floor he has stood on his whole life turns out to have been a trapdoor. Tripp stood up, then didn't know why he'd stood, and sat back down. One of the Whitmore lawyers was already speaking quickly, quietly, about reconsideration, about cooling off periods, about the relationship being more important than any single. There's no penalty to you, Daniel said, to the lawyers, not unkindly. Read the Founder's Clause. Hale forfeits nothing, you forfeit nothing. The deal simply doesn't happen. You're free to take it to anyone else. He paused. Though I suspect you already know there isn't anyone else. That's why you needed me. And here is where Vanessa Whitmore did not do the thing that people in stories are supposed to do. She did not fall to her knees. She did not weep and beg and clutch his sleeve and swear she had changed. Daniel had braced for it, half expected the performance, and it did not come, and that, more than anything, was the moment he understood her, finally, completely. She stood up. Her chin was high. Her hands, he noticed, were perfectly still, stiller than Clara's had been the night before, and that stillness cost her more. You think this makes you better than me, she said. Her voice did not shake. You put on a costume, and you went, and you collected evidence, and you sat in judgment of strangers who didn't know they were being judged. You let me humiliate a man on the floor of a party because it was good research. You could have stopped at any time. You didn't, because you wanted to see how far I'd go. Her eyes were bright and dry. You're not a better person than me, Mr. Hale. You're just a richer one. You can afford your morality. I couldn't afford mine. And the terrible thing, the thing that landed in Daniel's chest and stayed there, was that she was not entirely wrong. He had let it happen. He had stood at the margins with a screwdriver and watched cruelty unspool, because cruelty unspooling was data. And he had only crossed the floor when it reached Clara, when it became personal, and a more honest version of him would have crossed it for Priya, for the first careless word, weeks ago. He had dressed his arrogance in gray cotton and called it wisdom. She had named it in front of a room. He did not enjoy being seen as clearly as he had spent weeks seeing other people. You may be right about me, he said quietly. I've been wondering the same thing for a while. But you're confusing two questions. Whether I'm a good man, that's an open question, and you've made a fair case. Whether I'm going to hand my company's logistics network to a family that treats the people beneath them like furniture. That one I'm sure about. He stood. I hope you find another way through this. I mean that. But it won't be through me. There was one more thing in the room, and it happened in the doorway as the Whitmores gathered their papers. Preston Vale had come to the closing, the fiancé, the other fortune, the second half of the rescue. He had sat at the far end of the table the entire time saying nothing. And now he stood, and he did not go to Vanessa. He went to the door. And at the door he paused. And he looked back at the woman he was engaged to marry. And Daniel watched him perform a calculation in real time. Watched him understand that the Hale deal was dead, and that without it, the Whitmore name was a liability and not an asset. Watched him decide, in the space of 3 seconds, that the alliance no longer made sense. Vanessa, Preston said, given everything, I think we should talk later. Privately. It was the gentlest possible way to say a brutal thing, and everyone in the room understood it, and Vanessa understood it best of all, because she had spent her whole life in rooms where money decided who was loved. She had said yes to Preston to save her family, and the moment her family was no longer savable, Preston was already at the door, already gone, already calculating his way out with the same cold arithmetic she's herself lived by. There was a terrible symmetry in it. He was treating her exactly the way she treated the people beneath her, as a number that had stopped adding up. And Daniel saw the recognition cross her face, saw her register that she was, for the first time in her life, on the wrong side of the only equation she had ever trusted. She did not let it show for more than a second. She picked up her bag. She straightened her shoulders. Of course, she said to Preston, in a voice with nothing in it at all. Later, the Whitmores left the building before 10. There was no scene, no shouting in the lobby, no security called. There was only the quiet of three people walking out through a revolving door into the rest of their lives, and Gerald Whitmore did not look at his daughter. And his daughter did not look at anyone's. And the deal that would have saved them was a leather folder on a table with one line still blank. Daniel watched them go from the mezzanine above the lobby, and then he went down, because there was a thing he needed to do before the day became the rest of his life. Ray Coleman was at his desk. He looked up as Daniel approached. Daniel in the suit now, Daniel as himself, and for a moment Ray's professional nod started to form, the same nod he gave every stranger in a good suit, person, and not furniture. And then it stopped. Ray looked at the face above the suit, and his eyes narrowed, and something moved across them. Recognition arriving slow, and then all at once. "Danny," Ray said. It was not quite a question. "Ray, that's not." Ray looked at the suit, at the way the lobby staff straightened as they passed, at the security badge clipped to Daniel's chest that did not say Danny, and did not say a contractor's name. He had guarded this lobby for 19 years. He knew, in the way a man who watches a building for 19 years knows things, is exactly what kind of person the staff straightened for. "Oh," Ray said softly. "Oh, hell. I owe you a coffee," Daniel said. "About 19 years of coffees, actually." Ray sat back in his chair and looked at him for a long, long moment, and Daniel braced for it. The recalculation, the shift, the way people's faces changed when they learned the man they'd been kind to could not be done a favor for, but could do them one. He had seen it 100 times. It was, in some sense, the whole reason for the gray uniform, to find the rare person whose face did not change. Ray's face did not change. "Well," Ray said finally, "that explains the good light fixtures." He shook his head slowly. 19 years I've been telling new owners how to run this lobby, and not one of them ever listened. And the one who actually wanted to know just put on a gray shirt and asked me himself." A laugh, low and rueful. "You could have just asked, Danny. That's what everybody keeps telling me." "Everybody's right." Ray slid a paper cup across the desk, the good coffee, not the machine stuff, the same gesture as every morning. "Sit down a minute. You look like a man who just did something that cost him." Daniel sat. He drank the coffee Ray had bought him, the same as always. No different now that Ray knew, and that, the sameness of it, was worth more than the whole Whitmore deal, and he knew it, and he let himself know it. The aftermath was not loud, because the truest collapses never are. Whitmore Holdings did not find another buyer. Daniel had been right. There wasn't one. The shipping arm was sold off in pieces over the following months, the real estate liquidated to satisfy the banks, the family name removed from the building it had occupied for 40 years. Gerald Whitmore retired to a smaller life. Tripp discovered that he had skills only when there was a fortune to coast on, and was now learning, slowly and badly, to work. The engagement to Preston Vale, which had been an alliance of two fortunes, did not survive the disappearance of one of them. Preston's family found a reason, as such families do. Vanessa Whitmore did not crawl. Daniel kept track, distantly, the way you keep track of weather in a city you used to live in. She did not appear on a television show to weep about lessons learned. She got a job, an actual job, mid-level, at a logistics firm 3 rungs below the one her family had owned. And from what Daniel heard, she was good at it. Sharp and ruthless and excellent, and she did not, by all accounts, treat the people beneath her any better than she had before. Because consequences do not always teach the lesson we want them to. They are just consequences. The teaching is optional, and she had not opted in. Daniel found that he did not need her to. He had not done it to reform her. He told himself that, and mostly believed it. And the part he didn't quite believe he kept to himself. He saw her once more, almost a year on by accident, the way the important things kept arriving for him by accident. It was in the lobby of a building downtown, neutral ground, both of them there for unrelated meetings. She was in a good but not expensive coat now, carrying her own bag, and she saw him before he saw her, and she did not flinch, and she did not flee. She walked over. He braced again for something, an apology, an accusation, the old blade. "I run logistics for a mid-cap freight company now," she said, without preamble. "Did you know that?" "Of course you know that. You know everything. a small dry breath that was not quite a laugh. I'm good at it. Better than anyone there. They'll make me a VP inside 2 years, and they'll never know I used to own the kind of company they aspire to be. I heard you were good at it, Daniel said. You always were. I'm still not nice to the people under me, she said, and there was something almost like pride in it, something armored. In case you were hoping your little lesson took. It didn't. I think you should know that. I treat them exactly the same. The receptionist, the tamps. I drowned, Mr. Hale, and the people who drown learn one thing very well, which is that nobody reaches down for you, so you stop reaching down for anyone. You wanted to teach me a lesson about kindness. The lesson I actually learned is that kindness is a thing you can afford or you can't, and I can't, and I never could, and one ruined night in a penthouse didn't change the arithmetic. He looked at her for a long moment. He could have argued. He could have pointed out that Clara, who had less than Vanessa had ever had, reached down anyway. That Ray, who had nothing, reached down for 19 years. That the arithmetic she was describing was a choice she had decided to call a law. But he had spent a decade telling people who they were while wearing a costume, and he was done telling people who they were. Okay, he said. Thank you for telling me. That was all. She seemed almost disappointed by it, as though she had wanted a fight, and he had declined to give her one, the way he had declined to perform fear in the penthouse. She nodded once, briskly, and walked to her meeting, back straight, hands still, carrying her own bag into her own life, unredeemed and unbroken and entirely herself. And Daniel watched her go and felt no triumph at all, only the quiet recognition that consequences are not the same as lessons, that you can take everything from a person and still not be able to give them sight they have decided not to have. He had not ruined her. He had only declined to save her. The rest she had done and would keep doing on her own. He took off the gray uniform for good. Not because the experiment had been a success. He had come to think it had been a kind of failure. A clever man's way of avoiding the simple, terrifying work of trusting someone without a net. He took it off because it had stopped being honest. You cannot find a real thing while wearing a disguise. The disguise was the problem, not the solution. He had needed a woman to crouch down on a floor and hand him a napkin to understand something a child could have told him. That you find honest people the same way you find your own honesty, by taking off the thing you're hiding behind and standing there as yourself and letting it cost you. He found Clara because he wanted to, and because it was harder than it should have been, and because he deserved that it was hard. She had not, of course, been fired. Vanessa Whitmore had no authority to fire anyone in Daniel's building, and the catering company's manager had been quietly informed that the woman who crouched on the floor at the gala was to be given every shift she wanted, and a raise besides. But Clara did not know that came from him. She thought she'd gotten lucky. She did not know Danny, the maintenance man, and Daniel Hale were the same person, because the only time she'd seen him out of the gray was a photograph in a business article she would never have read. And so when he called her, as himself, with his own name, and asked if he could explain something to her over coffee, she had no idea who she was agreeing to meet. He told her everything. In a diner she chose, a real one, vinyl booths, and a coffee pot that never stopped. He told her about Eleanor and the spreadsheet, and the gray uniform, and the experiment and the wine and the napkin she would not even remember handing him. Except she did remember. She remembered all of it. He told her he was the man on the floor. He told her he was the man who could buy the building. He told her he had let a cruelty go too far in the name of research, and that she had been the only person in 200 who had crossed the floor. He expected her to be angry. He had earned anger. The deception was real. He had eaten her salmon under a false name. And she was angry for a while in the booth, and she told him so plainly that it was a strange and slightly sick thing to do, to walk through the world in a costume judging people. And he agreed, because it was, and he had stopped. But she also, and this is the part he had not dared hope for, she also laughed, once, despite herself, when he got to the part about Maya naming a houseplant Gerald, because of course she had been telling that story to a billionaire, of course she had, and the absurdity of it cracked the anger just enough. "So let me understand," she said. "You spent 8 years and God knows how much money building an elaborate scheme to find out if there was one honest person in the world, and the answer was—" "What?" The lady, throwing out the salmon. "More or less. You could have just asked people to be nice to you." "That's the thing about being rich," Daniel said. "You can never just ask." "No," Clara said, and she looked at him for a long moment, and the anger in her face was not gone, but it had moved over to make room for something else. "No, I guess you can't." They did not fall in love over a single cup of diner coffee, because that is not how real things happen, and what was between them was determined to be a real thing, and it took a long time. He had to prove, over months, that he was not researching her, that there was no costume left, that he was simply a man who had been wrong about how to be loved and was learning, late and clumsily, to risk it. She had to decide whether she could trust a person whose first version of himself had been a lie, even if the lie had been pointed at the world and not at her. There was a night, a few months in, when it nearly ended before it began. He had done something thoughtless, sent a contractor to fix the heater in her apartment, without asking, a small wrong thing, money, solving a problem the way money reflexively solves problems, without consent. She had come home to a stranger in her kitchen, and a new heater she had not chosen, and she had called him, and her voice had been very quiet, which he was learning was worse than loud. "I cannot be a project," she had said. "I cannot be a thing you fix." The heater was broken, and I was going to fix it, slowly, badly, my own way, like I fix everything. And you took that away from me to make yourself feel better, and you called it a gift. That's the costume, Daniel. You took off the gray shirt, but deciding what I need without asking. That's the same shirt. I don't need a verdict. I need a person who asks. He had stood in his penthouse, holding the phone, and understood that she had seen him more clearly in 4 months than Eleanor had bothered to in 3 years. And that being seen that clearly was the most frightening and most necessary thing that had ever happened to him. "You're right," he said. "Tell me how to do it instead." "You ask," Clara said. "That's the whole thing. You just ask." So he learned to ask. It was the hardest skill he had ever acquired, harder than building a company, because building a company is a series of decisions, and asking is the opposite of a decision. Asking is handing someone else the pen. He was bad at it for a long time. He got better. She let him get better, which was its own kind of mercy. But on a Sunday in the fall, almost a year after the wine, Daniel Hale sat in a booth in that same diner, across from Clara Bennett, while Maya, 6½ now, fully captured by the subject of pterosaurs, explained to him at great length why the Quetzalcoatlus was the most important animal that had ever lived. It was as tall as a giraffe, Maya said, but it could fly. A giraffe that can fly. Do you understand? "I'm trying to understand," Daniel said. "And it had a beak this big." She held her hands impossibly far apart. "Bigger than your whole arm? That seems like a lot of beak." It was the perfect amount of beak. Clara watched the two of them over the rim of her coffee, and she did not say anything, because she did not need to. The booth was warm, the coffee was bad. The waitress called everyone honey. And Maya, having exhausted the topic of flying giraffes, turned to Daniel, with the sudden total seriousness that children have, and asked the question Daniel would carry for the rest of his life. "Mommy says you used to wear a costume to work. Like a superhero. Was it a good costume?" Daniel looked at the child. He looked at her mother, who had gone very still, who had not told Maya much, who was watching to see what he would say. "It was a bad costume," he said. "It was supposed to help me find good people. But it didn't work, because you can't find good people while you're pretending to be something you're not." Maya considered this with the gravity of a small philosopher. "Then how did you find us?" He reached into his jacket, out of an old habit, the same pocket where he had once kept the black key card, the master card that opened every door, which he had not carried in a year. His fingers closed on something soft. He took it out. It was a paper napkin, ordinary white, folded into a small square, soft at the creases from a year of being carried. The same napkin Clara had crouched down to hand him on the floor of the gala, the one he had picked up off the marble and, for reasons he had not examined at the time, kept. He unfolded it on the table between them, this worthless, soft square of paper that he had carried for a year against Tyr's heart, in the place where the keys to a fortune used to go. And he did not explain it, and he did not turn it into a lesson. And Clara looked at the napkin, and then at him, and her eyes were bright. And Maya, sensing without understanding that something had happened, leaned over to look. "That's just a napkin," Maya said. "Yeah," Daniel said, "it is." He had built a company of 11,000 people. He had worn a disguise for the better part of a decade, to keep the world at a safe and grieving distance. He had needed all of it stripped away, the money invisible, the name unspoken, the wine soaking through gray cotton, 200 people watching him kneel. Before one person crossed an empty floor and handed him, without knowing or wanting anything in return, a single paper napkin. He kept it not because it meant she had passed a test. He kept it because it was the moment he stopped giving them. The most expensive thing he had ever owned cost nothing, and he had only been able to receive it once he had nothing left to hide behind. Maya was right. It was just a napkin. He folded it back along its soft, worn creases and put it away in the pocket over his heart where it belonged.